there are a set of certain rules that we would like to tell you. For the ease of listening of the esteemed panelists, we have muted all participants upon entry. Only the speakers are unmuted. We would request all of you to kindly, if possible, to keep your videos turned off as well. That will help in better connectivity. Also, if you wish to ask any questions to any of our esteemed speakers and panelists, please put your questions in the chat box, and we would pass it on to the moderator, who will accordingly take it forward with this panelist during the Q&A session. So thank you so much.
Good afternoon, sir. Mr. Chandrasekhar Ghosh has also joined with us.
Yes.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ghosh. How are you?
Fine. How are you, sir?
Good to see you.
So we'll be starting it right now with a small audio visual of Bandhan Bank, and then we can start the proceedings. So I'll just straight away go for that.
I think there is a problem with the audio of the clipping. Can we play it later on? Shombit.
Okay, I'll check the settings and I'll try and play later on once again. I'd request Chairperson Shri Sumit Bose, former Finance and Revenue Secretary, Government of India, and Chairperson, Economic Affairs Committee of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce, to take forward today's proceedings.
Thank you, Shombi. Good evening, everyone. We are meeting in difficult times. It's been 6 months since we encountered an unknown disease, and COVID doesn't seem to be going away. We've seen a lockdown. We've seen hard lockdown. We've seen the unlocking of the economy, but we've also seen the economy take a really hard knock in these 6 months. And we've seen government intervention, RBI intervention. We have seen each citizen doing his or her bit in these efforts. And we are gathered together here with a very, very eminent panel to discuss what the economy looks like today and what are the prospects for the next few months, if not years. So we have about an hour for the panel to speak, and then another 20 odd minutes we'll have for questions, which has already been explained how we will deal with the questions. So it's nice to see a large number of participants. So let's get on with the show. So I think the first round, I mean, and we'll do it in short bursts with the panel, uh, is, I mean, the government and the RBI has intervened uh, to mitigate what has happened to the economy and to citizens. Uh, let's begin by seeing how the panel views these interventions. I'll begin with Sajid. Sajid, since you've written recently on the sort of contrasting approach of Brazil and India, not only to the pandemic, but also dealing with the pandemic and to the fiscal responses. And so it'll be interesting to start off with that. I mean, that's the background. And what do you see? How do you see the government interventions and from India's point of view, where are we?
Thank you, Mr. Bose. Good afternoon. Lovely to be here. It was always a privilege to interact with Mr. Bose when he was in government, both within and without. I think, one of the things we must recognize is that emerging markets face unique trade-offs when dealing with pandemic. Developed economies like the US can wake up one morning and write a check for 5% of GDP in fiscal stimulus, and markets will not even bat an eyelid. They will just shrug their shoulders because they have the benefits of exorbitant privilege. The US is the reserve currency of the world. And you've seen unprecedented stimulus in the European Union, in the US, in Japan. Emerging markets have got to contend with pressures from markets, from investors, from ratings agencies. What you're seeing in India, I think, is an attempt to balance those trade-offs. I think we should not forget what our starting points were. India's debt to GDP was above 70% coming into COVID. Our consolidated deficit, including the public sector borrowing requirement, was 10% of GDP. So that has constrained the response. What we expect, or at least what the current borrowing program suggests, is a fiscal widening of about 5% of GDP, center and states together, between 4.5% to 5%. Now, two differences. Brazil is the other end of the extreme. Brazil has got about 11% of GDP stimulus. But frankly, Brazil will have a lot of problems establishing fiscal credibility when this is all over. I think India's challenge is the following, that even with a widening of the deficit of 5% of GDP, which seems large, the vast majority of that may be tax revenue shortages, what economists call automatic stabilizers. So tax to GDP could be lower by 3.5% of GDP, center and state combined, compared to last year. The problem with that is an environment of high risk aversion. Those tax savings that corporations get or households get may likely be saved, not spent. And so the multiplier effect of automatic stabilizers in this environment can be expected to be low. And therefore, what we should really gauge the fiscal response is by the discretionary spending. There, India, I think, is about 1.5% of GDP, and we may need to do a little bit more depending on how the recovery pans out. If you look at carefully the RBI surveys, you will find that households are very risk averse and expect 1 year down the line, 2 years down the line for spending to actually fall. Because when households perceive this to be a permanent shock, they tend to become more risk averse. If permanent income has been impacted, they will reduce permanent consumption. I'll just end with a couple of points. Similarly, private investment utilization levels were already below 70% coming into COVID. So I think we should brace for a gradual recovery in the private sector, both from consumption and investment. Exports, I think, will be choppy, which means the government may well have to do more of the heavy lifting going forward. I'll end with 2 points. One is, what could some of this heavy lifting be? Personally, the approach I prefer is to have a large infrastructure stimulus over the next 12, 18 months, because this will boost aggregate demand. It will crowd in private investment. It will be labor intensive, so it will create jobs, and it will help medium-term growth. The question is, how do you pay for this? And my preferred approach is to have, again, aggressive asset sales over the next 2-3 years. So you have a large injection in the economy through infrastructure, but it is fiscally neutral, paid by our asset sales. The very last thing I'll say is that the challenge here for the government is fiscal sustainability after COVID. We all expect debt to GDP to go between 85 and 90% after the crisis year, and that will not be easy to control. I think the key point to realize is medium-term debt dynamics depend crucially on medium-term growth. If India gets stuck in a 5% growth trajectory, then even if we are fiscally very cautious this year and next year, debt to GDP will keep rising. If India can go back to 7% growth in the medium term, even if we have more fiscal stimulus this year, debt to GDP will stabilize. So I think, let me conclude by saying fiscal policy has to do whatever it has to do to preserve that 7% growth in the medium term. Without that, debt sustainability becomes a question mark going forward. But I'll end with that, Mr. Bose.
Thank you, Sajid. Dr. Chandrasekhar, Mr. Chandrasekhar Ghosh, would you like to comment on what the government has done so far to intervene and give us your views on this matter?
No, there is very good point of now we have the situation. So if I see that the 5 months before and 5 months later, we can say that which we can be choice. Can we choose the recover and empowerment versus empower to recover? So I hope that we have now time to empower the people how they can be recovered on that. And in that sense, the government and the bankers cannot be run the enterprise. And the enterprise will be run by the entrepreneurs. So we can be only help. The government can be help and the bankers can be help on that to funding on that. My second point on that, if we see that the total situation of the last 5 months, rural is better than urban. In the affected number of people, or the very quick they are recovering, all that sense the rural is better than on that. So focus is the rural recovery will be coming very earlier than the urban and metro. In that sense, it has been already started, but only depend on that. A lot of time we are opening and saying that the lockdown open. Until the lockdown will not open, so we are not empowered the people to recover on that. How lockdown open? So now lockdown open, we say that fourth cycle we have been completed. But till now, when I talk with my customer in the Shantipur or Pulia, who are making the weaving a shari, and they say that until the Mongla Haat and Khanna Haat is not open, until the local train is not open, we cannot be like to reach them. And the surrounding states, which the buyers are coming in the one day before to this market and buying it and carrying it, until the state to state travel are not open. So this type of the economy are not in a coming to the normal position on that. Even if I give to the more loan, if I give to the government will give the more of the free money to their account, they can be only running their family, but they cannot become out to run their business and sell their products. So I feel that it is need now, not only providing that the financial package will be gradually to open, whatever the people say that will be like to open on that. And also we are learning day by day in that the people are adapted the COVID such a way it is a part of the life. Though it is at Calcutta, if we or India, if we see that the beginning of the COVID, that is mainly April, there is a daily affected in a 1,500 to 2,000. All people are inside of the home. Now, per day 1 lakh, we are coming out from the home. That means they are already adjusted with this. And from their mind, they understand about it, we'll be like to survive with them. So that will be run our business. If until we are not running our business, income will not come. So COVID also cannot be like to survive and not given the any help from the government to full life. I can be full year can be like to survive on that. So in that sense, we should be like to gradually open these things which people create the environment also where the people can be like to freely doing their business. And of course, simultaneously, we are educate the people and they should be very careful about the COVID. And whatever the quick is possible, vaccination will come. That confidence also given to the people to come to the normalize on that. Normalize is not in a one decision. One decision taken in the 24th of the March, that lockdown. But in the when we say that it will be like to finish, we are now normal. It is not in a one declaration. People should be accept on that. So I hope that the as per my interaction with the people, rural people, too much they are open to come to the business to do it until this type of some of the limitation is not open. So they will not like to come out. So that economy will be not can be helped by them to grow on that.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Ghosh. You emphasized on unlocking of the economy, and we'll come back to you. Now, we've had an idea about what the government has done, the constraints it had, and the other part is what the RBI has done. And I think no one better than Shomokanti Ghosh is here to explain that. He has written, you have written, Shomokanti, on this, the need for a coordinated approach and between RBI and GOI, a tango in fact, for a most effective outcome. So may I now ask you to spell out what the RBI has done and what more perhaps we can expect from the RBI?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bose, and giving me the opportunity to come here. See, I think our earlier speaker, Sajid and Mr. Ghosh has put forward what the government has done and the important to get out of the lockdown mode. But one aspect which I'd like to highlight is that what the central bank actually has done in the course of this pandemic. If you remember, I think the RBI was the first of the bloc to announce a comprehensive set of measures, and then the government followed suit. RBI has followed this up with successive policy measures in April. It has also done in May. Recently also it has been done. And specifically, I think if I just try to go back, I think the approach of the central bank, the RBI, reminds us of basically an innovative approach to policy making. Basically, I mean, what the Western economies do in terms of and more discretionary policy making. In the Indian context, but sometimes we do more by textbook, but the RBI currently, the policies which has taken, it has more of a discretionary nature, and that has actually served the purpose. I mean, to just take a few examples, I think as you know that in Indian context, the transmission of the rates has always been a problem because of several constants. I don't want to get a discussion with that because and also because of the fact that monetary policy works with long and variable lags. But what happened is that this was, I think, when the RBI had cut rates by 115 points beginning from March, all the scheduled commercial banks had cut rates by around 91 basis points. So this was the first transmission which has ever happened in the history of the monetary policy in the context of India. The second thing which happened to the market was the financial stability coming back into the market. All of you must be aware that the NBFCs has been going through a lot of crisis since the 2018 when the IL&FS crisis broke through. But the central bank has been successful in bringing back stability into the market, and the credit spreads between the risk-free and the not risk-free NBFCs has significantly narrowed down what it was in March to what it is currently. So, and the other thing which has happened is that the NBFCs, even the lower rated NBFCs, some of them are now being able to tap the market, which was unheard some time back. So if you look into all aspects of mine, the central bank has been able to stabilize the market. The central bank has been able to, and most importantly, we have a 22 trillion government borrowing program. The Reserve Bank of India if you just go by a simple logic, and if you look into this 2008-9 when we had faced an equal crisis, I think the spread between a central government 10-year paper and a repo rate, which is the policy rate, would actually had meant that the yields, the 10-year yields, which we commonly call, could have been at more than 7%. But remarkably, the central bank, the RBI, has kept it at close to 6%, even within 22 trillion borrowing. So that is another thing which the central bank has done. And the last point is, and the last couple of points which I'd like to mention is that, as you know, that in a situation when the global economy has been fragile, when the capital flows has been volatile, there is always we always work with this impossible trinity. And to that extent also, the central bank has been able to maintain an independent monetary policy, allowed the exchange rate to appreciate a little bit. And I think that has been a very good strategy, given the fact that the central bank wants the yields to control, and also at the same time brought back financial stability in the market. So I think full marks to RBI for working with several quadrilemma or pentilemma or whatever you call, monetary policy independence, external stability, financial capital flows, bringing back all to the market. And it now, I mean, and in that, and going forward, if you ask me, I think the central bank has made it clear that it will keep its option and gunpowder ready to fight any battle. And the challenge will be more in the fourth quarter, when the state governments will come to the market for the body. For the time being, I think the central bank does a very erudite job along with the government of India in trying to stabilize the economy.
Thank you. Now, Ajay, we have Ajay Thakur from BSc. Would you like to comment, Ajay, on the performance of the capital markets? Because we've seen the capital markets at one point of time, there's been absolutely no sort of semblance of a connection with the real economy, and it seems to have boomed. It's been volatile. So much SEBI chairman has had to warn first-time investors to be careful. So it'd be nice to get a sense of the capital markets from you, and the direction it's taking.
Very good evening to all of you, and thanks to BCCI for inviting me for this event. Before talking about the capital market, I would like to, talk about, little bit MSME sector, which I am looking after in the stock exchange, being the head of the.
Come back to MSME if you don't mind. I mean, I'll come back to you for MSME.
Okay.
Just
so, Okay. So as far as the capital market is concerned, in the month of March, we have seen a lot of outflow from the capital market. Lot of fund outflow has happened, and therefore the index Sensex has fallen from 42,000 points to 25,500 points, and especially it has impacted the share prices of automobile sectors and the banking sectors at large. And most of the stocks have touched 52 weeks low. And, everybody was talking about very negative picture about the capital market, and, talking about earlier, bear market, whereby it will remain like it for quite long. But everybody has been taken by surprise. I have seen many analysts writing that be cautious on the market. But since May, we have seen not only in the Indian market, but also in the international market, that lot of liquidity has come into the market. Especially it has started from United States, and from there it has started flowing into India, whereby FIIs, etc., have found the capital market, Indian capital market, very attractive. And let me tell you, all the stocks, because of the liquidity, starts jumping. And many of the stocks, especially in the pharma sector and the FMC sector, especially touching 52 weeks high. So I don't think as of now liquidity is driving the market, and it is behaving, in fact, capital market first time behaving like a P fund market, private equity market, whereby, people are talking about the future. They don't talk about the loss. And on the turnover, they value the company 5 times, 10 times, depending on the sector. So in the same way, we have seen it happening on to the capital market itself, where the liquidity is driving the market, and it totally got delinked from the actual fundamentals, because we have seen the Q1 results, and Q1 results were not so encouraging. In fact, the results were very bad, but still most of the stocks we are seeing that they are touching high every day. It has creating a new high, especially the pharma sector stocks have given very fantastic results. In fact, some of the company has shown good results also, and the same thing has happened in the FMCG sector. Even after that, since August, as we have seen the traction in the automobile sector, we have seen the share prices catching in those sectors also. For example, Maruti, Bajaj Auto, or Hero Moto, their also share prices are picking up. Only one sector which has been laggard as of now is the banking sector, which has still not recovered. Hope maybe the market is not so much positive on the banking sector, but going forward, once the economy will improve and the fundamentals will improve, I think that the banking sector will also start improving.
Okay, thank you. We'll get back on SME because you and Dr. Chandrasekhar, both you are the experts on the small sector. We'll just get back. Sajid, if I may get back to you, there has been almost a scramble in North Block to look for green shoots. There's been they're trying to read the tea leaves from the high frequency data and come out with something about green shoots and recovery. Are we actually going down the right path there, or should we be more pragmatic about what is happening to the economy and then take things forward?
Mr. Bose, I think reading the data is going to be tricky this time for a variety of different reasons. And let me try and spell out what some of those reasons may be. One of the things you're seeing all over the world is a two-speed recovery. That around the world, the goods sector is recovering much faster than the services sector. And this is no surprise. These discretionary services are much higher contact. And given the proliferation of COVID, will recover much more slowly. So one is to appreciate the fact that, in the goods sector, for example, in India, we look at 10, 15 indicators, you find that activity as a level of pre-pandemic level is back at about between 85 and 90%. But the services sector could be recovering more slowly. I think the second point to note is that there is going to be an element of pent-up demand, right? And so we need to account for that. You might find a very strong recovery for a few months because people are spending in July, August, September, what they could not spend in April, May, June, for example. The third is you will see substitution effects. For example, people are wary of using public transportation. So you will see that small passenger vehicle cars or two-wheelers, for example, you're seeing high demand for that. Then you've got the rural-urban split, right? The rural economy may do better. We've seen a strong monsoon, strong sowing. Food inflation has been high, so the terms of trade have moved back to rural. And you've seen that NREGA allocations are much higher. So the rural economy has an automatic stabilizer, which the urban economy doesn't. So my point is that reading the data is going to be very tricky over the next few months. My own sense is that we should look at the levels of output and where they are compared to pre-pandemic. And we think the goods sector is, between 85 and 90% and recovering slowly. I think the services will take some more time and need to be patient on that front. But I think ultimately we have to recognize that a prerequisite to a more complete recovery is to ward off the virus. Because until, we see this in the US, the activity gets better and then virus cases pick up and activity flatlines again. Not so much because there are legal lockdowns, but because household risk aversion gets higher. So let me conclude by saying, we still have a long way to go. The good news is the goods sector is recovering quite rapidly, but we'll have to wait a few months more to see how much of this is pent-up demand, what's happening to the services sector, and how much of this is substitution effects. My worry still is that unlike previous crises, economic agents, both households and firms, will perceive this to be as a quasi-permanent shock. You see, 2008, everybody knew it was a 3-month crisis. And if it is deemed to be a temporary shock, then what households do is you dip into your savings and you smooth consumption. The minute this takes on a more permanent nature, then household medium-term behavior changes. And you tend to increase savings in the medium term and mark consumption. And that's my concern. The very last thing I'll say is the key for India is not so what growth is this year. Even if we have a bad number this year, a lot of it will be influenced by the first quarter. The key is going to be what happens to medium-term growth. Does India go back to 6-7% in 2022-23? And that will depend crucially on whether the initial COVID shock amplifies. Does it amplify through the financial system? And does it amplify through the labor market? If it does amplify, then even after the virus is gone, we may see the lingering effect on a more risk-averse financial system or more hysteresis in the labor market. If we can reduce the amplification and dampen it, then even if we have one bad year, there are much better chances that we go back to our previous rate of growth.
Thank you, Sajid. Now, infrastructure spending has been a major sort of a point made that would be a major thrust to the economy. It was made in the initial remarks also by our panelists. So, Soumya, you had written this morning, in fact, in the Economic Times along with Vinayak Chatterjee on funding infrastructure. Would you like to explain how you see government trying to fund infrastructure in a situation where the fisc is badly limited and budgetary provisions are restricted?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Before I answer that, just one very quick point on this two-phase recovery which Sajid mentioned. I think the problem with this current crisis is that, and the service sector is that, manufacturing sector can actually ramp up what it had missed in the earlier months, but service sector cannot ramp up. For example, if you have missed a holiday this year, you can't have 2 holidays next year. So from that point of view, the service sector needs government support so as to survive in the long term. Now, having said that, regarding the infrastructure sector, yes, I think one of the ideas which we have espoused today is creation of a national renewal fund. The idea behind that creation of a national renewal fund is that, as you know, India has a national infrastructure project pipeline of around 111 lakh crores over the next 3 to 4 years. But the problem is that around 21% of that is private participation. And I believe around 44% is actually has to come from the government revenue. Both of those are highly stressed in the current fiscal. So instead of, going along that route, we are suggesting that why not create a system of, say, a national infrastructure renewal fund, which could actually be a combination of support to states, creation of a health infrastructure, creation of support to some of the misery sectors, and of course, a capital base from a development financial institution. We can always agree and disagree of the size of the program. We suggested it could be a 50-year program, which is around 30 lakh crore with 14% of GDP. But the numbers actually doesn't too much over here. But the idea is basically to create a fund which could be funded over effectively with judicious intervention with the public and private sector, and some innovative thoughts of funding. For example, we have suggested, and this is an example in history, I think even the European countries right now do, why don't we can't use a console or a perpetual bond? Because as we all know that the government debt to GDP ratio is likely to go beyond 85% this year, maybe touching 90%. So why not come with some innovative funding? For example, a console or a perpetuity bond for a longer period of time, which does not have a principal repayment or just an interest repayment over a point of time, because there has been history in the experience of UK, history in the experience of Japan. In fact, Netherlands, there is an example of 1648 bonds, which is still paying back the interest. So we thought that perhaps some sort of a financial arrangement, some innovative could solve the purpose. And also the fact that there has to be a greater push to clear out the logjam in the payments, which is stuck in the, for example, in the GST portal. So our estimate suggests that this number could be significantly large. So why not also clear all those pending payments? Because that could also be some sort of a fiscal push, along with some push from the highest level in the government. Maybe that could be an PMO office, or maybe it could be other thing. But the idea is that infrastructure spending, yes, is the need of the hour, because that will create multiplier effects. And right now, if I have to give an example, I think right now in the pandemic is the most appropriate time to build up the infrastructure, because we are not doing enough other we're not being able to do enough other activities at this point of time, given the scourge of the pandemic. So that is one of the viable policy option which India could embark on, but we have to think through of financing this, and that's exactly what we have tried to do.
Thank you. Ajay, you wanted to speak about the small sector, small and medium sector, the SMEs. There has been also government, besides the other interventions, there has been this classification or reclassification of micro, small, and medium enterprises. How has that worked out? There is a feeling that because of this reclassification, some of the really small, that means the micro sector, may feel the pinch because they might get left out, or really sort of get left out on credit and other things which are available to the sector as a whole, the SME sector as a whole. Would you like to comment, Ajay?
Yes, yeah. See, if you see in last few years, SMEs have been growing at the rate of 4 to 5%. And in fact, this year also, because of this COVID, they have been impacted a lot. Now, I will like to divide MSME sector into two parts. If you see the MSME as a whole, only 2% is in the formal sector and rest 98% is in the informal sector. Now, these 98% informal sector hardly avail loans. They are mostly dependent upon their own source of funding. Yesterday also we were deliberating in the CII meet, and it was said that, the government focus is to bring more and more companies into the formal sector so that they can avail the loan facilities and all other incentives or all other, policy intervention that government is offering time to time. So that is the main focus for the government. And I think more and more SMEs should move forward and they should formalize themselves, because there are many SMEs who are in the range of 20 crores to 100 crores businesses. So that is the one part. Another part is, government has tried to, bring a lot of funds for these SMEs. One, of course, they have changed their definition. I think it's for good, because there was a demand since long. And in fact, the earlier definition was as per as the MSME Act 2006. So anyhow, it was the demand of the time by all the SME industrial association to change the definition. So that's why the government has done it. The second thing is that the government has come out with this 3 lakh crore fund, whereby they said that any SME who is availing loan up to 25 crores till 27th February 2020, they can get additional 20% collateral free loan. And besides that, the first time the government has come out with equity fund of 50,000 crores. So I think these things will help these SMEs, to grow, because equity is a very important component. Because in India happened that almost, most of the SMEs have been bulldozed by the debt funding. You go to any place and everybody will talk about debt. They hardly talk about equity. And they take so much loan, especially when the economy is good, that even if little bit there is an impact on the economy, they are unable to service these loans. And these MSMEs are very important sector for the economy. Unless until MSME will grow, I don't think the country will go. Again, the rural economy, what everyone is talking about, which is growing as of now, it's mostly because of the migrant laborers who have migrated to the rural sector, and they have created demand. I think it's because of that. We don't know what will happen tomorrow when these migrant laborers once again shift to this industry, and whether after that still there will be a rural growth. We are not quite aware about that. So that has to be seen. No, still, as of now, we are seeing these MSMEs getting impacted because of the shortage of laborers also, and their payment got stuck. So we have to ensure that, and especially now the government is releasing the payments to most of the industry. At the same time, most of the public sector enterprises, private sector enterprises, and the state enterprises have to ensure that they should start releasing payment to the MSME. I think that then only this MSME will come out of the problem. As of now, they are cash strapped. So I don't know how much they will be able to benefit things all the benefits that has been given to them. The another very important thing that I think the government should think of, that they should provide them one identifier. As of now, there are so many identifiers like GST, Udyog Aadhaar, then Aadhaar, and there are so many linkages that are, and many of the times these SMEs don't go into the formal sector because they are not aware about so many compliances, and they get scared of these compliances. So unless until these compliances are simplified, their miseries will not get over. So I think these things need to be done. Only then I think that the MSME sector will come out of these problems. And their growth is very much necessary for the growth of the nation. I think all the stakeholders should start thinking in those terms also.
Thank you, Ajay. Mr. Chandrasekhar Ghosh, would you like to please add about anything on this, including on the reclassification, because your experience with the micro sector, you're closer to the ground than anyone else. Mr. Ghosh.
Muted. Thank you, sir. It's a big market, no doubt on that. That is in MSME, we are categorically defined on that. Micro, small, and medium. Actually, the medium will be like to provided by the big bank always. And small, partly they are providing on that. But the micro, 90% of this, the total MSME, they are unregistered. They have need to first register, then they will get the benefit from the government. So if we like to register, there is a new law has come to the Ministry of Finance and RBI. They've given the name of the Uddam Aadhaar. Uddam Aadhaar means they have a need first of that, there is one PAN card. Of course, they have a need is a trade license. Where business is established, they have need in the trade license. So trade license is not so much easy to get in our country. I can get that the online, my PAN card, but not my trade license. You know that what is happening in the ground level. In the semi-urban and rural areas, very tough to get the trade license. So until the trade license will be not happen, and third point, they have also need on that, the income tax return, or they have the income proof. So this type of enterprise, income proof is not matching in that way, whatever you say that. And so that until the documents are not available, so they cannot be like to register in the Uddam Aadhaar, and they will not get the benefit of MSME, whatever that they are providing. So I feel that we should be simplify this process. Otherwise, the larger number of MSME, which is the micro level, they are not getting, but they have need more. Comparative to the medium and small, micro level is a need this type of benefit from the government on that. So this is the one side. The next point, you are very correctly, some of that people talked about it. Our country have the agri-based economy. And though it is a large number of amount is coming from the service sector, but till now, 55% of the people for employment depend on agriculture. So in that agriculture and going to service sector, and between two, there is another sector we should be like to focus to develop on that, which is called the manufacturing unit. So we can be like to build up the some of the food processing unit in the rural or semi-urban areas where people will get the job more, and investment opportunities also coming to more on that. And another third point, if you see that the agri infrastructure is not available in our country. So farmers are harvesting their product, and that crop is coming to their hand, but a crop can be get the chance to storage. The warehouse and cold storage is not available in the rural areas. So government should be need in this time is the right time to focus on that cold storage and warehouse to develop, and people also get the job who are migrated labor. They also get the job in the local areas, and they can be like to support this economy, and economy will be recover from this moment. I hope that the MSME is a very good opportunities to give this support to them, and they can be like to, given that big employment also, that employment also happened in that. Final one point, sir, I am not like to much more talk about you because you are the best and the finance background and other people also. Only 11% bank branch have in the rural India, which is serving to the 70% people. Would you expect on that the rural people are getting the chance to build up their own equity? Because until they are not in a daily transaction with the bank, they have a need in a 15-20 kilometers far to go to transact in the cash transaction with the bank. So their equity will not develop. Until their equity will not develop, bank is not also liberalize them to lending them. So ultimately, credit is not going to the rural India. Until it is not going to the rural India, so our unemployment situation or our economic growth, there is a lot of things we can be talk, but it is not really impacted to the country on that.
Thank you. I think organizers want to show a video and then we'll just come back to the discussion.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
How long will this take?
It will for two, 3 minutes here.
Okay.
Yeah. Shombit, can you arrange it?
A garment store that's struggling. A woman looking for a job. Together, they create a new Bandhan. This is how a new business is born. This is what creates a self-reliant nation. On our 5th birthday, we pledge to support businesses that make India stronger. Bandhan Bank. Sabka bhala, desh ki bhalai.
A tourist jeep lying idle for months. An empty vegetable market. Together, they create a new Bandhan. This is how a new business is born. This is what creates a self-reliant nation. On our 5th birthday, we pledge to support businesses that make India stronger. Bandhan Bank. Sabka bhala, desh ki bhalai.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So we can carry on with our panel. Let me put one question to the panel, and unfortunately, one aspect of our polity which has been hit, especially during the COVID, is federalism, and this has, come to a fore with this GST.
আমি খালি ভাবছিলাম মাঝখানে ঝুলে না যায় একটা সময় দেখি ইন্টারনেট চলে গেছে
with GST compensation issues, the imbroglio. One reason I suspect is we no longer have a finance commission which used to apply some sort of a balm to the states whenever they felt aggrieved. So how do we see this going forward? This is our country comprises of states. And if states is going to be continued mistrust on various issues, the economic development which we envisage is going to get held back. Let's start with you, Soumya. Would you like to say something, Soumya Kanti, on this?
Yeah. No, I think it's a very valid point. India is an agglomeration of, I think, around 30 states. And the states have been as the vanguard of the COVID battle, as you know. And it's very extremely important that we hold our hand to the states together in this fight. So, and the problem with the states is that if you actually look into their revenue structure, the own tax revenue, the GST, I think the GST has been a remarkable reform, but I think it is taking time to settle. The benefits are flowing back slowly because the Indian economy, in between there has also been financial market uncertainties. So keeping all these factors in constant, I think it's imperative that we hold our hand to the states, and because at the end of the day, most of these activities which the states are doing are actually they are leading from the front. So, and I just like to add one point over here. I think recently, as you know, that the states are going to lose a significant amount of their shortfall in their revenue, and unlike the center, the states doesn't have the power of taxation apart from some specific items like fuel and the alcohol, other things which are basically falls within the purview of the states. So it's imperative that we ensure that the states are able to get the money which it requires, so that it can continue to fund. Otherwise, and that's actually going to be a negative point in the current fiscal, because what is going to happen is that and given the fact that this center's fiscal position is also strained, and the center may not be able to compensate the state GST shortfall, as we all know that these states will have to borrow in the market. So what it is likely to do is that the states will significantly cut back on their capital expenditures. So if that is the case, you will see that a large part of the states, including the larger states, will actually falter in their growth in the coming year. So from taking all these points into perspective, I mean, federalism should imply that we follow strictly, it is in principle, and the ideas of fiscal federalism in terms of giving more power to the states, given the fact that they are now a part of the cooperative federal structure, is most important in the context of the current pandemic.
Ajit, would you like to add something to that?
Well, just I think, just to make the larger point, I think 2 points. One is a broader point and one is more narrow and related to the pandemic. The broader point, I think, is obvious that all of the reforms that we're currently seeing and will need to see involve both center and states, whether it's agriculture, whether it's land, whether it's labor. And so it's imperative, I think, that the center and the states work closely together. Many of us had hoped that the GST Council would have become a model for other councils, for other reforms, a land council, a labor council, a power council, so that states can present best practices and learn from each other. So I think it's very important that that spirit continue. I think in the more narrow context of COVID, the point Shomo makes is a good one. A lot of capital expenditure is taken by states. And so it's important that there is no artificial squeezing of deficits, both at the central level and the state level. I think there are some silver linings here, however, that even if some of the entity has to borrow, whether it's center or it's state, there is the concern that how will this be financed? And Shomo had brought up the point earlier of these dilemmas and quadrilemmas that the central bank is facing, because what we're seeing in India is inflation has gone up a little bit over the last 2-3 months, and that will make the central bank a little bit wary of injecting more liquidity into the financial system. So against that backdrop, how do we get more financing in the second half of the year from center and states? I will argue there are 2 silver linings. One is from a purely macro perspective. India will be running a current account surplus this year. What that means is, by definition, the private sector savings investment surplus is going to be higher than the public sector's savings investment deficit. So India, after a long time, is going to have excess savings. Now, part of that is because of aggregate demand is weak, the economy is opening gradually, but that also means that financing deficits, both at the center and state level, may not be as difficult as we imagine, because when you run a current account surplus, there are these excess savings, household and corporate savings sitting in the system, and the operational equivalent of that is a large quantum of liquidity. I think as long as the central bank can signal to banks that bond yields will not harden dramatically, we may be surprised at the quantum of center and state issuance that banks can absorb, because banks are risk averse to lend to the real economy. They would like to buy government bonds. They would like to buy state bonds. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, that we should not artificially constrain spending in the second half of the year for worry of financing, because there could be more space than we think. Lastly, I'll end on a slightly more technical point. Mr. Bose had asked about what the RBI had done. There was some regulatory forbearance given to banks a month ago, that their HTM portfolio can temporarily be increased. What that means really is that banks can hold a greater fraction of bonds without worrying about mark-to-market risk. Why is this important in the context of states? Because what you typically hold in your HTM portfolio are the higher yielding bonds. So again, banks may have a little bit more space to absorb the higher yielding STL. So I think there are two issues. One is center and state need to work together for many things, but there maybe is a little bit more space for financing in the second half than we think, given the weakness of the private sector.
Good. Thank you. Does inflation worry you, Sajid? There's been some elevated levels we have
yes.
seen. How and that's going to affect everyone.
Yes.
And everything. So does it worry you?
So there are two elements to inflation. One is the high food inflation we've seen over the last year now. After many years of very benign inflation, food inflation has been about 8 to 9%. And again, there the hope is that we've had a strong monsoon. We're seeing a strong harvest, so strong sowing. So hopefully that supply in the market over time will cause inflation to come down. Because supply chains have been disrupted and because of the pandemic, you're seeing certain segments have higher pricing power. But the more quickly the economy normalizes, hopefully the impact of higher supply will bring food down. The last point I'll make is the more puzzling part about inflation is all of us thought COVID would be disinflationary. But in fact, core inflation has gone from 4 to 5.5%. There are two hypotheses here. One is more benign, one is more worrying. The more benign one is this is also a supply shock. Because supply got impacted, pricing power went up. Hopefully, as supply gets normalized, you should see disinflationary forces. And frankly, in July and August, we've seen the momentum of core inflation come down. The more worrying scenario is that 1 year of high food inflation through higher inflation expectations is spilling over into core prices. But I'm not in that camp. I think the demand shock in this economy is going to be so large, not just in India, around the world, that this will ultimately be disinflationary and that will provide more degrees of freedom to the central bank over the next few quarters.
So that's some good news in the future we can hope for. Okay, Soumya, would you like your perspective on the threat of inflation?
Yeah, I think I would like to, while I agree with what Sajid is saying in terms of a supply disruption, I think we had actually done a very interesting study 2 months after when the NSO first released their data, and which showed that in April, the inflation numbers actually shot up to 7.282%. I think it's actually implies a significant change in the consumption habit in the economy. What is happening is that people are actually sitting at home, and this has been happening actually globally. So while people are sitting at home, on a lighter note, people actually are eating more of food. So basically, if I am still eating more at home, I am actually eating more of staple diet. I am eating more of rice, dal, and whatever other things. So that's what, and the service consumption, like the hotels, the restaurants, those service consumption is actually missing products from the CSO basket. And these actually were imputed by the NSO during the lockdown month. That's exactly the point which Sajid mentioned. So that's why that imparted an upward bias on the core inflation. But my sense is that the significant change and in the inflation habit on the consumer, where people are not using services, but only using food, which is a 46% weightage in the overall consumption basket. That means that people are actually using more of services where the weights are significantly larger and prices are going up because of supply disruption. I think this is going to be a problem for the next couple of months, because I don't see the service sector activity coming back to any time normal in the next couple of months. So if people continue to stay at home, even though this inflation could be a supply side shock, on the downside, the problem could be that it will not go down in a hurry. It may not significantly increase from the current levels, but it may not go down in a hurry, reflecting the demand side destruction in the economy. And if that is the case, I think in that case, the possibility of the central bank doing immediately some accommodative policies could be a little bit stretched at this point of time. So it's actually something of a change in the behavioral habit which is happening if you look into the overall trends.
Thank you. We have a few minutes more before we can move to the next the question and answer part of the discussions. May I just, I think, so in the midst of all this gloom, I would like to end the discussions on a positive note. So, may I ask all the panelists, beginning with you, Mr. Ghosh, Chandrasekhar Ghosh, can you point to two sort of very positive things you see even in this gloomy situation regarding the economy, regarding the financial world?
So positive thing is that the agriculture production has come very good. And the second is the rain also came as a very normal position, and farmers have been shown the next plan is very good way. So I hope that the economy will be revived very quick on that.
Good. So you see hope in the rural areas based on agriculture. Right. Thank you. Ajay? Two positives?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I think there are two positive points. In fact, if you see country like India, we have as of now 61 lakh case of COVID. But if you see the fatality rate, it is just 1.5%. And now people are not scared. You see the economy opening, and laborers and other staffs officers, individuals have started joining offices, and you are seeing the traction in demand. That's number one. Number two, what we have seen is in the capital market, there is no dearth of liquidity. Almost 10 lakh crore of funds have been raised to the capital market by various corporates. And that is obviously going to increase the demand in the market and create a very comfortable situation for all corporates. And which, of course, I think that will translate into better growth in the economy.
Thank you. Sajid?
So two things. One is the external sector, which we sometimes don't fully appreciate, which is that while COVID may precipitate more protectionism, it is going to also precipitate firms moving out of China, looking for other locations within Asia to relocate their supply chain. The mantra in the region is China plus one. And I think this is India's moment in the sun. This is our opportunity to get hold of part of the supply chain, which doesn't otherwise move for 30, 40 years. So I think it's an opportunity externally to push on the export front, to become part of the supply chain. The second positive, I think you would know better than me, which is Indian policymakers tend to reform more during periods of crisis. We've seen 1991, we saw 2013 with the taper tantrum. So I'm hopeful that crises such as these, and we're seeing this in some emerging markets, create political space. And we can use that political space to actually execute reforms that have been pending for a while. So those are the two things that give me hope. One is we'll push through a reform agenda in the next 12, 24 months, and we can exploit the opportunities that firms leaving China are presenting India.
I didn't want to ask, but this China thing, why recently there was a survey of CEOs by Mint and some, I think, Bain Capital. To my surprise, only 10% of the CEOs were enthused about being substitute to China. Why do you think that is so?
So I think there's no question that some countries in the region like Vietnam, when it comes to smartphones and technology, Bangladesh, when it comes to apparels, have got a head start. And there's no question that India has to do the hard work to present itself as a viable alternative. I think it's a bit ambitious for us to do all reforms everywhere. I think given that the window is narrow, my own preferred approach is more of a special economic zone approach, which is in fact what all countries in the world have used to break into supply chains. Just let there be one or two zones to start with. And I think we need to have some regulatory reform to avoid the pitfalls of the previous SEZs. But if you can get one or two SEZs where land acquisition is easier, there's labor flexibility, you've got good infrastructure, good port connectivity, now corporate taxes for new manufacturing are lower. If one can succeed, right, I think the demonstration effect of that is very powerful, both internally, because then more states will want to replicate that model, and externally. Now we've seen some big names come to India in terms of smartphones, and we're doing some assembly, but I think the value add there is low. So I think to institutionalize those gains something like an SEZ is necessary, but we'll have to create that to be seen by CEOs and by the rest of the world as being on par with the Bangladesh and a Vietnam.
Soma, 2 points from you.
Yeah, I'll take the liberty to make 2 plus 1 point. 1 point is basically in the context of the general, but 2 points clearly which stands out is that first is that this has a positive and a negative connotation, but the positive thing is that the consumer deleveraging has been at its highest level in the last couple of months. So basically consumers have been, for whatever reasons, consumers have been very frugal in the spending and other things. So that is actually likely to have a sobering impact on the retail portfolio. The second thing is that in the month of July, if you look into this, even within the month of the lockdown, and July actually was a very bad month followed with August, the digital lending on the part of the bank has been at the highest level. So this means this contactless banking, which the banks have been trying to push through, that has been largely successful, and that is also being borne out by the UPI transaction, which has now reached unprecedented levels, which which is now much higher than even the February 2020 levels in terms of volume and in terms of number. So I think these are two significant achievements. And finally, one important point, I think all others have mentioned points, but let me give you a positive point. I think all crisis makes available new companies. I'll read out some examples. The Uber was born in 2009, the Microsoft in 1975, the Disney was in 1923, General Motors in 1908, and General Electric in 1890. So I look forward that possibility there could be growth of some new institutions. In India, already we're seeing a significant traction in terms of an education and possibly some innovations in the healthcare. So maybe who knows that online education or something could be one of the new craze which could happen in the next couple of years. So there are every possibility that new companies are always born out of a crisis, and this crisis might not be an exception.
Thank you. We will move to the question and answer session. I have received a few questions from through the organizers, and but before that, there's one question which Professor Ajit Roy Chaudhary, who's Deputy Chairman of our Economic Affairs Committee, he would like to put to the panel. Professor Roy Chaudhary, can you unmute him, please?
Yes.
Yes.
No, it's a very enlightening discussion. But let me just flag two things. One is that, in the service sector, there is an unequal situation. The USA, the share markets are led by e-commerce and tech service companies. These are all services. But transportation, travel, and others are just financial services are simply not there. Remember, the services which are lagging depends a lot on turnaround of manufacturing sector, because service sector demand largely follows some of the service sector demands from manufacturing. It's not households. Households demands part of it. No Indian study has made a input-output analysis how much demand originates from manufacturing, how much from the household sector. If that is done, it will be a great service to us. We know that what's there. The multiplier effect, we talk a lot. The second question which I have, second point, we talk about infrastructure, quite rightly so. In fact, the current account in the first 3 months in this year is a surplus, but then again, it's going to be negative. It's not a year-long thing that we have a current account. The services sector has a surplus, but the goods sector again will have a deficit. Overall, we'll run into deficit. The point is how much we can expect of infrastructure investment through foreign investment. That's a big route, I think, because everywhere we talk about that investment is so much important now, infrastructure, multiplier effect, long-term growth prospect, but the foreign investment can play an important role, and that should be looked into carefully what the government can. And the last point which Sajid mentioned in the chat also, this, the global value chain we can break is either in assembly or parts and components. Then to the subcontracting gone up in, leaps and bounds in last 20 years in India itself. So if this subcontractor now and way if I'm not so hopeful, China stopped the SEZ, it's still they are flourishing now. SEZ has a lot of inequality questions. When inequality has gone up in India, it will go up tremendously if we do not carefully regulate it. And that will put up, again, a problem in our demand side.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
so I couldn't hear the last part of. So would the panelists, anyone like to sort of react to what Roy Chaudhary said? Then we can move on. Anyone?
We could not hear the last part of the second question. Yes.
Which part really?
The last part.
The part about
where
global
the last
value
started.
chain.
Yeah.
Well, the global value chain, that didn't come through, unfortunately.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say is the global value chain, China moved from simply parts and component producer to assembling. I mean, there's two components in the value chain. Either you can be an assembler or you can be a parts and component producer. Some of the Southeast Asian countries are simply parts and component producers. They're not assemblers. Where exactly India will put their space on? I mean, getting into a GVC, getting into a supply chain is easy. But once you divide these two things, India is in different positions. And another thing which is the inequality in India has gone up. It's simply value. If you calculate it, you know that if it goes up, if the inequality is higher, the multiplier value is lower. And if you go for regulatory reform and more SEZ, can you manage the inequality issues which are cropping up? Like urban inequality has gone up quite a bit in last 10 years. How can you manage it or not? Thank you.
So, Sajid, would you like to comment?
No, Mr. Rashari makes some excellent points. And I think there are no easy answers here. I think several things. I think on the global value chain front, you're exactly right that you start with assembly. If you think about Vietnam did, they started with assembly. And then over time, you essentially create the ecosystem, because then as you do more and more assembly, you will find subcomponents, producers locating domestically and some of that imports then get substituted from domestic production. The advantage that India has is we also have a very large domestic market. And I am not for a moment saying that we should be picking and choosing winners and losers. I think, dynamically, our comparative advantage will come through. Take, for example, apparels. And my favorite example is, as Chinese real wages went up in the last 20 years, we believe that many of those apparel exports would come to India. They did not. They went to Bangladesh. And part of the reason was Bangladesh was operating at the right scale to cater to the global market. I mean, there's a very interesting study by Dr. Arvind Panagria's book where 80% of the people in the apparel sector in India were working in firms that were 8 people or less. In China, 50% work in firms sizes that are 500 or more. So this is going to be complicated. This is not going to be easy. I'm just making a very simple point that no country in the last 100 years has grown at 7 or 8% for 10 years without strong export growth. And that was the driver of growth in India between 2002 and 2010. The difference is at that time, the global economy was booming and a rising tide was lifting all boats. India now has the challenge that we have to get strong export growth in a more protectionist environment. And the only way to do that is to increase our global market share, which will mean in some products and services breaking into the global value chain. But it is going to be a lot of hard work. There are inequality questions, regulatory questions, but we can't escape facing and eventually answering those questions if we have to get 7-8% growth for a decade. That was my more limited point.
So, I have some questions, and Arnav and Chombit, you can send me some more. One was this firms exiting from China, but why are they not coming to India? This is a question. We see maximum companies going to other Asian countries, but not coming to India. So there are a couple of questions on this. Why are they not coming to India? I think it's already been explained some of this, but still. The other is, what would be the impact of the COVID on climate change? Would we come out with a better sort of environment to combat climate change after that, after this COVID, post-COVID? These are two questions I have. Would anyone like to take them? Then there are some more specific ones. So, would anyone like to take on this climate change? Anything on climate change?
Climate change, I just like to add one thing. I think this is something which is more long-term in nature. If you actually look into the data, there has been a significant improvement in the air quality index. I mean, if I just take a short-term view, there has been a significant improvement in the air quality index post the COVID in several towns. But I think that has, we are now slowly getting back as more the cars coming and other things. We are actually getting back to the old wisdom of having poor air quality. But having said that, I think this climate change, the issue of climate change is of actually long haul. And my sense is that one thing which is likely to do after this COVID, because what has happened that in the last 10 to 12 years, if you look into the history of the global growth story, the emergence of tail events has been significantly larger. We had this 2008 crisis, we had some sort of a crisis in 2013, we have now one 2020 crisis, which is once in 100 years. So possibly what is likely to happen, that given that more tail events are now happening with alarming frequency, I think policymakers would be more guarded and could be more forthcoming in dealing with the climate change in the coming days. Because I think they must take this as an opportunity to understand that, the global economy is not in standstill, and there is every possibility that the events like this, which could not have happened in 100 years, could happen again. So from that point of view, I'll be happy if the policymakers take some solace from this example and try to ensure that this climate change is properly addressed, which unfortunately as of today is not done in that manner.
There are a couple of questions on what would be the impact of the farm bill. I know that the Bengal Chamber has arranged for our next session to be actually focused on agriculture, but I think it's a question, since more than one person has raised this issue. Would anyone like to? Mr. Chandrasekhar Ghosh, would you like to comment on this farm bill, the recent bills on farm marketing, freeing up? What impact can we expect from that? Mr. Ghosh, or anyone else?
Ghosh is saying you have to unmute yourself.
Oh, I am not on mute. Oh.
Chandrasekhar sir, if you can you say something?
Now I am audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. I have not, can we go to the details on that? But my point on that is a very good initiative taken on that one sense. The farmers can be sell their product, not only the government, they can be also go to the contract farmer. They can get the good price on that. If they only depend on government, so that is not good. In the future, their income will be not increased. In that sense, it is in one side, I see that very good for farmers in future.
Right. Anyone else would like to add anything to that?
I'll just add one point to that. I think this point is also related to one of the points which you mentioned about the exports. I think about the global value chains were mentioned. do you know, it's surprising that Indian agricultural share in the global agricultural exports is higher than India's share in the global exports of overall. So I think this means that India has been unable to take advantage of its agricultural exports. And as of now, the total agricultural exports from the country is around US 35 billion, if you am correct, 35, 37 billion. So this 1 lakh crore infrastructural fund which has been created, this coupled with this policy of allowing free market access to the farmers throughout the country, if these two can actually run concurrently, and if you build up a proper infrastructure, I think then I think that could incentivize the farmers for a better deal. We had a green revolution in the country in the 1960s, 70s, but my sense is that the time has now come for more white revolution. I think, as you know, India is the largest milk production in the country, but we are also in a situation whereby actually there's a lot of milk which is spoiled because it cannot reach the farmers. So a proper infrastructure coupled with a proper farm export policy will give the freedom to the farmers to sell their products throughout the country. So basically, it's like an one nation, one market, the GST, what it has tried to do to the economy.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions on why MSMEs are not able to access loans up to 5 crores. Further, the additional 20% line of credit is only for companies having existing line. Unbanked MSMEs are not getting any loan. Would anyone, Ajay, would you like to comment on this?
Yes, there has been a lot of representation from various. Yeah, there has been a lot of representation from various MSME associations that those who don't avail this loan facility should also be given. And I think those suggestions have already gone to the Finance Ministry and the MSME Ministry. And I'm quite hopeful that they will look into it.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add one point, sir?
Yes, please.
As a lender, the bank will be like to very critical position where they will be balanced from depositors' money and the borrower's repayment. This should be balanced on that. So when the lenders feel that the money is not repayable, so then they will be very much conservative to lend on that. So it is a depend on that the MSME, which MSME is a good portfolio and the repayment capacity is good. I hope that they are not facing any challenge to get the money from bank. So this is one thing we can be. And other point also, whichever earlier I mentioned about in 90% MSME, they have not yet registered. Until they are not registered, they will not get the benefit whatever the government declared. So that we suggest on that. So those MSME like to get that benefit, they will be immediately go to this Uddam Aadhaar registration and they will be eligible to get this funding.
Thank you.
No, but in this case, there may be some situations where some people might have repaid their loan before February 2019. Though they might be good company, but because of this COVID-like situation, they may be facing these problems. So for those companies, I think, of course, the banks have the liberty and they have got the jurisdiction whether to give the loan or not. But I think this facility should also be given those MSME whose loan is not outstanding till that date. That's the moot point. That's the main point what these people are suggesting.
Okay. Good. There was a question on the possibility of higher fuel prices affecting us. But Sajid, you have covered that, and according to you, in fact, we have lower fuel prices at the moment, and therefore are able to, on the current account, we have a surplus, isn't it?
That's right. For what it's worth, our expectation is that global crude prices will remain in this soft range between 40 and 45 for the foreseeable future because of the demand destruction around the world. And so hopefully that's one less thing for us to worry about.
Thank you.
See, I have one question to ask Sajid. You know what Sajid has said that, savings will go up. But, recent data, what it is employment potentially have go without how the savings will go up. I would like to understand.
Sorry, I could not hear that, Mr. Thakur. Could you just repeat that, the second half of the question?
I think
Hello?
Mr. Thakur is facing some bandwidth issues.
Okay.
Mr. Thakur, you can you can write it on a chat and we can share that with the.
I think his network is back. Mr. Thakur, we could not hear your last bit. Could you kindly just repeat once again?
Yeah. Well, what I was trying to understand, not being the economist, that as unemployment has gone up substantially, and therefore as people don't have the income, even most of the companies don't have been showing good profit. Under those conditions, how the savings will go up?
Yeah.
So that's what I want to understand.
It's a good question. So when I talk about savings, I mean the savings rate. So incomes will clearly go down. The question is, as a share of GDP, what's happened to consumption, what's happened to savings? Now, what we're seeing, for example, in the banking sectors, you look at deposit growth is extremely strong, right? But credit growth is extremely weak. So if you break it down into households and corporates, it's very unlikely that in the next few quarters, corporates are going to invest. So whatever profitability there is, reduced profitability, will be saved. The household sector, similarly, those that have jobs, if you believe this to be a permanent shock, you will adjust your consumption downwards. And in some cases, the saving was forced in the first 6 months of the pandemic. Even if you wanted to spend, you could not. And you're still seeing that I could not go out. I could not take that vacation. I could not go to that restaurant. But even as the economy opens up, we're seeing this around the world, not just in India, that as a percent of income, incomes have gone down, but as a percent of income, savings rates have moved up in the US, they're moving up in India. Ultimately, the current account is by construction as an identity, the savings investment gap. So to the extent that the first 6 months of the year, the current account is in surplus, it tells us from an economy-wide perspective, savings have been higher than investment. In the next 6 months of the year, as the economy recovers, the current account should go closer to balance. But number one. Number two, one last point I'll make is capital flows have been very strong. We expect this year that capital flows will be 3% of GDP. So if capital flows are 3% of GDP and your current account is in a surplus of 1% of GDP, what that means from a macro perspective is there is about 4% of GDP in quote unquote excess savings. Now, of course, that savings can go to various places. It could be money under the mattress. It could be in the equity market, real estate, gold. But if banks are reluctant to lend to the real economy, much of that deposit growth will ultimately get channeled into buying government bonds. Whether it's short-end bonds or long-end bonds becomes the real question. We want banks to buy long-end bonds. Right now, they are buying more short-end bonds. Sorry for the long answer.
No, that was very useful. So, thank you to all the panelists. And that brings us to an end to this very, very rich discussion. And I'm grateful to all of you, Sajid, Mr. Ghosh, Tom, and Ajay, for participating in these discussions. We look forward to inviting you back here from time to time with the Bengal Chamber and in their various programs. Thank you very much. Thank you to the audience. You've been you've all been there and you've been sending these excellent questions, which some of which one has been able to put to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. And thank you so much to all the speakers for taking time out from their busy schedules and, coming and speaking and deliberating on some very insightful and enlightening discourse on the prescription for the possible way forward for the Indian economy in the coming days. We would also like to thank our sponsors for this series today. Our webinar partners, Bandhan Bank, Coromandel, Synergist, Exide, and our industry support partners are Tax Connect, BSE SME, and Sanico. we would be also having the second series coming up in 15 days time. That's on 14th October, where the spotlight would be on trade, infrastructure, logistics, manufacturing. So we would request the audiences to also join us during that session. We would separately send you invitations and circulars, flyers to attend that. Once again, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, sir, for taking.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.